Somewhere between the last good season and the moment the guests stopped coming, these resorts froze. Pools filled with leaves, lobbies cracked open to the sky, entire coastlines of vacation homes swallowed by silence. In this video, we are walking through 12 abandoned resorts the world forgot. The last one is not just an abandoned hotel. It is an entire city, sealed off by international conflict, that no one has been allowed to enter for over 50 years. Number 12, Grossinger's Catskill Resort, New York, USA. For most of the 20th century, if you were wealthy and Jewish and living on the East Coast, there was one place you went in the summer: Grossinger's. Nestled in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, this resort wasn't just a hotel, it was a world unto itself. At its peak in the 1950s and the 1960s, Grossinger's sprawled across over 1,200 acres, with its own post office, its own airstrip, its own ice rink, and a guest list that read like a who's who of American entertainment. Eddie Fisher got his start performing on that stage. Rocky Marciano trained in that boxing ring. The swimming pools were packed every weekend from June through August. Families returned summer after summer, generation after generation. The Catskills weren't just a destination, they were a tradition. The resort had its own zip code, 12776, a small fact that somehow captures the scale of the place and the seriousness with which several generations of families treated their annual pilgrimage north. But by the 1970s, the tradition began to crack. Cheap airfare opened Florida and the Caribbean to the same middle-class families that had always driven up from the city. The Catskills felt provincial. Attendance dropped steadily. The resort changed hands, cut staff, closed wings. In 1986, Grossinger's shut its doors for the last time. What is left today sits behind chain-link fencing on private land. The main hotel building still stands, its bones intact, but its interior gutted by decades of weather and vandalism. The pool is empty and gray. The ice rink collapsed years ago. Trees have pushed through the old tennis courts. Urban explorers who have slipped inside report finding registration cards still sitting at the front desk, a calendar frozen on a month in 1986, and a ballroom where the chandeliers still hang, draped in cobwebs and dust. Number 11, Coco Palms Resort, Kauai, Hawaii, USA. Few hotels in American history have burned themselves into the cultural imagination the way Coco Palms did. Built in 1953 on the island of Kauai, the resort stood on land that had once been a royal estate, surrounded by the largest coconut grove in Hawaii. From the beginning, it carried a weight of place that most hotels simply never achieve. Elvis Presley filmed scenes for Blue Hawaii here in 1961. The wedding scene, with its torch lighting procession winding through the palms, became one of the most iconic images in post-war American cinema. Honeymoons were booked years in advance. The nightly torch lighting ceremony drew crowds who sat quietly in the dark, watching flames move through the coconut trees. It was the kind of ritual that turned a hotel stay into something closer to a ceremony. People planned entire trips around it. Some made the journey from the mainland specifically to witness it. Then came Hurricane Iniki in September 1992. One of the most powerful storms ever to hit Hawaii made direct landfall on Kauai and reduced much of the island to rubble. Coco Palms was devastated. The owners filed for bankruptcy. Reconstruction plans were drawn up, disputed, revised, and abandoned in cycles for the next 3 decades. Today, the resort has sat empty for over 30 years. The coconut palms still grow, but everything beneath them has been overtaken. The famous lagoon is choked with vegetation. The thatched bungalows have collapsed into themselves. Successive developers have purchased the property with grand promises, but environmental concerns, community opposition, and the sheer cost of restoration have stalled every attempt. The torches have not been lit in a generation. Number 10. Monte Palace Hotel, São Miguel, Azores, Portugal. The Azores sit in the middle of the Atlantic, a volcanic archipelago that feels closer to the edge of the world than to any continent. São Miguel, the largest island, is covered in crater lakes, geothermal springs, and forests so dense and green they look prehistoric. Into this landscape, in 1987, someone tried to build a luxury hotel. Monte Palace was constructed at the summit of a dormant volcanic crater, overlooking a lake called Sete Cidades. The location was extraordinary, the project was ambitious, and the hotel never opened to the public. Construction was completed, interiors were fitted, and then, for reasons that were never fully explained, a combination of financial difficulties and development disputes meant the doors never opened. The building sat empty from the moment it was finished. What nature has done to Monte Palace in the decades since is genuinely difficult to describe. The Azorean climate is relentlessly wet and warm, the ideal conditions for rapid biological takeover. The hotel's corridors are carpeted in moss. Ferns grow from the windowsills. Entire rooms have been colonized by plants pushing through the floors. The swimming pool has filled with rainwater and algae, turning a deep, still green that mirrors the crater lake below. From the outside, the building is almost invisible beneath the vegetation. It looks less like a failed hotel and more like something the island grew itself. Number 9. Haludovo Palace Hotel, Malinska, Croatia. In 1972, the most famous magazine publisher in the world built a resort on a Croatian island. Bob Guccione, the founder of Penthouse, poured millions into a complex on the island of Kirk on the Adriatic coast. The vision was total. A palace hotel, luxury apartments, a casino, tennis courts, private beaches, a European playground for the jet set. For a few years it worked. The Haludovo Palace drew celebrities, businessmen, and high rollers from across Europe. The casino floor buzzed, the terraces filled with guests watching the Adriatic change color in the evening light. Then the money ran out. Guccione overextended, the casino revenues fell short of projections, and by the late 1970s, the resort was quietly sliding toward insolvency. It changed hands several times over the following decades, operating intermittently as a more modest hotel before finally closing for good in the 1990s. What is left today is a peculiar kind of ruin. The main hotel building is still structurally solid, a massive concrete block facing the sea. The apartment complex that was once the height of modern luxury has been stripped of everything removable. Marble floors remain. Iron balcony railings hang at odd angles. The swimming pools, designed for capacity crowds, sit bone dry and peeling under the Croatian sun. Local residents swim on the beach just below. The old palace looms behind them, watching. Number 8. Bokor Hill Station, Kampot Province, Cambodia. French colonial architects had a habit of building in impossible places. Bokor Hill Station is perhaps their most extreme example. Constructed in the early 1920s at nearly 1,100 meters above sea level in the Cardamom Mountains, the complex was intended as a retreat from the brutal lowland heat. A hotel, a casino, a church, and residential buildings were carved into the edge of the Cambodian jungle at the top of a cliff that drops into open sky. The view from Bokor is unreal. On clear days, the Gulf of Thailand spreads to the horizon. On overcast days, which are frequent, the entire complex disappears into clouds. The hill station was abandoned twice. First during the independence movement of the 1950s, then again when the Khmer Rouge took control of the mountain in the 1970s. The casino became a military position. The old hotel became shelter for soldiers and refugees. Violence was conducted in rooms that had once served afternoon tea. After decades of abandonment, a development company began constructing a new resort adjacent to the ruins in the 2000s. The new buildings exist alongside the original colonial structures, which have been left largely as found. The old casino stands at the cliff's edge, its walls stained black with mold, its interior picked clean. The church still has its walls and roof. Whether that counts as preservation or neglect is difficult to say. Number 7. Hachijo Royal Hotel, Hachijojima, Japan. Tokyo has 8 volcanic islands scattered south into the Pacific. The farthest and most remote of the group that saw significant tourist development is Hachijojima, a small island shaped by 2 overlapping volcanoes. In the 1970s, Japanese domestic tourism was expanding rapidly, and Hachijojima was positioned as a tropical escape accessible by a short flight from the capital. The centerpiece of that vision was the Hachijo Royal Hotel, a sprawling complex built into the jungle hillside above the coast. Multiple buildings were connected by covered walkways. There was a pool complex, a golf course, and banquet halls that could accommodate hundreds of guests. The hotel peaked in the bubble economy years of the late 1980s. Then the bubble collapsed. Low-cost international travel became available to ordinary Japanese travelers, and the appeal of a domestic island resort evaporated almost overnight. The hotel closed in 2006, and it has sat untouched since. Japan has a specific relationship with abandonment. There is a word for it, haikyo, which means ruins, and an entire subculture of respectful urban exploration has documented places like the Hachijo Royal in extraordinary detail. Photographs show the resort preserved in the particular stillness that only comes when a place is left completely alone. Furniture sits in place, wall decorations have not been vandalized, and the pool area has been taken over almost entirely by encroaching jungle, green pressing in from every direction. It looks less like a ruin than like something the forest decided to keep. Number 6. Salton Sea Beach Resorts, Imperial County, California. This one has a creation story that sounds like a mistake because it was. In 1905, irrigation canals feeding the Imperial Valley broke open. Water from the Colorado River poured unchecked into a dry desert basin for nearly 2 years before engineers stopped the flow. The result was California's largest lake, sitting in the middle of the desert with no natural outlet and no reason to exist. For a few decades, no one seemed to mind. By the 1950s, the Salton Sea had been reinvented as a resort destination. Marinas, beach clubs, and vacation communities appeared on the shoreline. The fish were plentiful. The water was warm. Developers built yacht clubs in the desert. The town of Salton City was platted for 100,000 residents. Roads were graded, lots were sold, and advertisements in national magazines described the shoreline as California's answer to the French Riviera. The collapse was slow and then total. Because the sea has no outlet, salt concentrations have increased it steadily for over a century. Fertilizer runoff from surrounding farms created algae blooms that consumed the oxygen in the water. The fish died. The birds that fed on the fish died. The beaches became covered not with sand, but with the compressed skeletons of millions of dead tilapia. What's left along the shoreline are the structures those resort communities left behind. motels with no windows, boat launch ramps that end in cracked earth, a yacht club whose dock now sits hundreds of meters from the waterline as the sea continues to shrink. Some buildings are occupied by the small permanent population that remains. Others have been open to the desert for so long, they've become part of the landscape. Number 5. Burj Al Babas, Mudurnu, Turkey. Drive 2 hours east of Istanbul into the Bolu Mountains, and you will eventually pass something that does not make immediate sense. Hundreds of identical miniature French chateaux cover a hillside, each one a small, turreted castle in white stone, each one empty, each one identical to its neighbor, stretching up the slope like a developer's dream that ran out of dreamers. Burj Al Babas was designed as a luxury resort community targeted primarily at wealthy Gulf state buyers. The concept was European aesthetics in the Anatolian mountains. 732 individual villas, a shopping center, a hotel at the center, and thermal spa facilities. Construction began in 2014. At peak development, hundreds of structures were simultaneously underway. Then the financial collapse hit. The Turkish lira lost significant value. Gulf investment dried up. The developer filed for bankruptcy in 2018, with the complex sitting at roughly 80% completion. Hundreds of finished chateaux stood unoccupied and unsold. Hundreds more sat in various stages of construction, some fully framed but without interiors, others barely past foundation stage. What makes Burj Al Babas unsettling is the sheer scale of the repetition. One abandoned chateau is a curiosity. 300 identical abandoned chateaux spread across a mountain is something closer to a hallucination. Every turret the same angle, every entrance arch the same proportion. A city designed for thousands of people that never had a single resident. The development had been marketed internationally with glossy brochures and Dubai-style renders. Nothing in the marketing material anticipated what it would look like when the cranes stopped and the silence moved in. Number 4. Mount Kumgang Resort, Gangwon Province, North Korea. This one is unlike anything else on this list. Mount Kumgang, in the southeastern corner of North Korea, is considered one of the most beautiful landscapes on the Korean peninsula. The mountains are dramatic, heavily forested, with waterfalls and coastal views that have been celebrated in Korean poetry for centuries. In the late 1990s, the South Korean conglomerate Hyundai negotiated a deal with the North Korean government to develop a joint tourism resort at Kumgang. South Korean tourists would travel by ship to the North Korean coast, visit the mountains, and return. For a few years, it worked. Over 1.5 million South Korean visitors made the journey between 1998 and 2008. Then in July 2008, a South Korean tourist was shot and killed by a North Korean guard after strafing into a restricted area. South Korea suspended the program immediately. North Korea refused to accept the terms required to restart it. The border effectively closed around the resort. The South Korean built hotel facilities, hiking trails, and visitor centers now sit inside North Korea, inaccessible to everyone. The North Korean government has at various points threatened to seize the buildings or demolish them. Satellite images show the structures still standing, the parking lots empty, the cable cars motionless on their lines. A functioning modern resort complex, locked behind one of the world's most heavily militarized borders. Number 3. Neptune Hotel, Hamhung, North Korea. Hamhung is North Korea's second largest city, an industrial center on the country's eastern coast. It is almost never visited by outsiders. Even sanctioned tours, which travel to Pyongyang and a small number of approved sites, rarely reach Hamhung. What sits on the coast just outside the city is known primarily through the accounts of a handful of journalists and diplomats who passed through during limited access periods. Neptune Hotel was built during the era of Soviet-style development in the 1980s, intended as a beach resort complex for domestic tourists and foreign visitors who never substantially materialized. The hotel sits directly on the East Sea coast, a large, concrete structure built for a volume of guests that North Korea's tourism industry was never able to generate. Accounts describe a building in serious deterioration, staffed by minimal personnel, operating in a state of near total vacancy. The beach facilities, including a pool complex visible in older photographs, appear to have largely fallen out of use. The hotel's dining facilities were reportedly functional during documented visits, but the broader complex had clearly been designed for a future that did not arrive. What makes Neptune unusual on this list is the near total absence of documentation. Unlike every other entry here, almost no photographs from inside exist in the public domain. What Neptune looks like today, whether it still operates at any level, whether it stands or has been demolished, none of this is reliably known. It exists primarily as a gap. Number 2. Pyramiden, Svalbard, Norway. Svalbard is an archipelago in the Arctic Ocean, closer to the North Pole than to the Norwegian mainland, permanently frozen, perpetually dark in winter, perpetually bright in summer, home to more polar bears than people. And somewhere in the middle of this landscape, wedged between a glacier and a fjord, sits a Soviet mining town that was abandoned in 1998 and has barely been touched since. Pyramiden was established by the Soviet Union as a coal mining settlement in the 1940s. At its peak in the 1980s, over 1,000 people lived here, miners, families, support staff, in a self-contained community that included a school, a hospital, a cultural center, a swimming pool, a farm that kept cows and chickens, and a concert hall with a grand piano. The Soviet government wanted life in Pyramiden to be a demonstration of what socialism could provide even in the most extreme conditions on Earth. Then the Soviet Union collapsed. Coal mining became economically unviable. The town was evacuated in 1998, mostly in a matter of days. Residents left behind almost everything: furniture, books, children's toys, sports equipment in the gymnasium, a bust of Lenin that still stands in the central square. In the school, notebooks were left open on desks. Wall calendars in the administrative offices still show April 1998. A clock on the wall of the cultural center reportedly stopped sometime during the evacuation and was never restarted. The Arctic cold has preserved Pyramiden with extraordinary completeness. There is no decay driven by heat and humidity here. The gymnasium floor has not warped. The cafeteria equipment is still in place. Small expedition tour boats now make seasonal visits, bringing the only movement to a town that otherwise belongs entirely to the Arctic foxes that have taken up residence in the abandoned buildings. In the early 1970s, Varosha was one of the most popular beach destinations in the Mediterranean. The southern suburb of Famagusta, on the eastern coast of Cyprus, had built itself into a resort district of gleaming hotels and apartment blocks along one of the finest stretches of coastline in the region. International tourists arrived by the hundreds of thousands. Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, Brigitte Bardot. The hotels were new, the beaches were pristine, and the future looked like a permanent summer. In July 1974, Turkey invaded Cyprus in response to a Greek-backed coup. The invasion was rapid and overwhelming. As Turkish forces advanced on Famagusta in August, the entire population of Varosha, approximately 39,000 people, fled in a matter of hours. They left everything: Clothes, food on stoves, cars in garages, businesses stocked and open. Turkish forces reached Varosha and immediately fenced it off. The entire resort district was declared a restricted zone. No one was allowed in. No one has been allowed to return for 50 years. The implications of this are almost impossible to fully absorb. An entire functioning resort town, sealed on a single day in 1974, has been sitting behind razor wire and military fencing for half a century. The hotels that were completed and operating are still standing. The streets are still laid out exactly as they were. The cars that were left behind have rusted in the same parking spaces where they were abandoned. A Volkswagen dealership still has the 1974 models in the showroom windows. Shops still have goods on the shelves. Hotels still have linen in the rooms. The geography of a single Thursday in August has been held in place by razor wire and political stalemate for 5 decades. Nature has taken the place apart slowly and without interference. Trees grow through floors, facades have crumbled. Roofs have collapsed into interiors. But the scale of the place means that decay proceeds alongside preservation in ways that are hard to categorize. Some buildings have come down. Others still stand with enough structural integrity that satellite images show intact floors and walls. There have been partial political gestures in recent years. A small beachfront section was briefly reopened, creating controversy and legal challenges. The broader question of what happens to Varosha, whether it can be restored, whether its former residents will ever see it again, whether it will simply continue to dissolve, remains unresolved. What it represents is difficult to name exactly. Not just an abandoned resort. A freeze frame of a single afternoon in 1974, a beach town that has been locked in that moment ever since, while the people who built it, lived in it, and loved it have grown old, waiting to go home. These places were built for escape. It turns out the world is very good at leaving things behind.